Hello friends, welcome to DotVVM Loves .NET Conf local event. I'm so happy to be here with you. I hope that you had some time to watch the amazing sessions that were presented at .NET Conf. There were also two code parties which presented partners of .NET Conf, which was also very nice because you could find a lot of third parties, a lot of vendors of components or solutions on the .NET platform. And even if you didn't have time to watch the amazing sessions, we have a short recap for you. So if you missed the most important announcements about .NET 6, about Visual Studio 2022, and other nice features, just stay tuned because we will be talking about them shortly. So let's just start with our presentation. My name is Thomas Hersek. I am the founder of DotVVM, which is an open source project. It's a member of .NET Foundation, which is a very good organization that helps open source projects in many different areas. So this is why we are streaming here on the .NET Foundation YouTube channel, and we are happy to share the news from .NET Conf with you. And also, as part of this session, we will also share some features which we are preparing for .vvm 4.0, which is our next major release. So stay tuned, and I hope that you will find some good and useful information that will help you in whatever you do with .NET. So if you haven't never heard about DotVVM, we will go to DotVVM very shortly. So it's an open source framework that you can use for building new web applications using model view model approach, or you can use it to modernize old web forms apps without rewriting everything. So if you have some legacy web forms application which has been developed for many years, you can smoothly transition to .NET 6 using DotVVM. So that's what DotVVM is. However, now let's talk about the news from the .NET 6 and the news from .NET Conf. So the most important thing, at least for me and for our DotVVM team, is the release of .NET 6, a new version of .NET which has the long-term support, which is also a difference in contrast to .NET 5, which was amazing. It brought a lot of new features, but it wasn't LTS. So .NET 6 is long-term supported, which is good. If you want to migrate from .NET Core 3.1, .NET 6 is the version you are probably looking for. If you look in the release notes of .NET 6, there is a lot of performance improvements in many different areas, because performance since the first versions of .NET Core is a huge topic for Microsoft and for the .NET community. So there is a lot of people who are doing amazing things to make .NET faster and of course more reliable and also deterministic, because a lot of new performance things in .NET 6 are also focused not only about some average performance and things like that, but also to make the performance more predictable. There is amazing feature which will also help you speed up your development process. It's my most favorite feature, which is called hot reload. Basically, when you make changes to your code, you don't need to recompile the entire application and to kill the currently running instance and run the new process with all these initialization tasks and things like that. You can just inject the code changes into the running process. So if you make some smaller changes in the code, then the application will be still running and it will just use the new version of method implementations, basically. There are also a lot of language improvements in the C# and also in F# and VB.NET if you are using them. I guess most people is using C#. So there is a lot of new things in the C# language. ASP.NET Core also supports HTTP3, which is also a new version which is more fast. It helps to decrease the latency of many web applications, many scenarios. There is also a very nice feature called source generators, which a lot of community projects and open source libraries on .NET already started taking advantage of. So you can see And also .NET 6 is taking advantages of it, like in the JSON serialization. Thanks to source generators, you can pre-generate the code to make the serialization and deserialization faster. And there is a lot of scenarios like this. I have seen some alternatives to Automapper library, which is using source generators to generate the maps at the compile time, not in the runtime. And there is a lot of interesting scenarios. And if you like building desktop or mobile applications, then make sure to watch MAUI. It's not production ready yet, at least what feeling, this is the feeling I have from .NET Conf. There is still a lot of work to be done on this technology, but still it's a nice area which will improve in the future, and hopefully it will be the new way of building multi-platform applications for all the platforms the .NET is currently running at. So what about performance? I have created a slide with few informations about performance. There is a new dynamic profile guided optimization, which does different things than the tired compilation when your .NET app is being run. Basically, there is some trade-off between the runtime performance and the startup time. So if you enable dynamic profile guided optimization, the startup time of the process will be a little slower. However, the runtime performance when you are calling your methods, it will be much faster, and they are doing amazing stuff in this area. There is also some improvements in the IL generation. So there are, for example, the alignment of loops. So they start at some nice places in memory, which helps to optimize a lot of things in the runtime, like that the variables can be in the good registers and CPUs. If you had some problems with the file stream implementation, like that even there were asynchronous methods, but some of them were still blocking the thread because the underlying implementation wasn't really async in many places. In .NET 6, most of the file stream is re-implemented, so it takes advantage of more modern APIs, and it should be faster. Like they published the numbers, and the speed up is quite significant, like tens of percent of something. And some operations which were blocking in the past are now fully asynchronous. So this is nice. If your code is using a lot of file I/O, you can expect that your application will be faster with .NET 6. Also, this is important for the runtime itself, because if your application is using a lot of libraries, then also the loading the library is the actual reading some file from the file system. So also this is helpful even if you are not using the file stream on your own, but the runtime is using it somewhere. So also on these places it will be more faster. There were some improvements in casting and interface checks, because this is the thing that slows many things during the runtime of your application. Because if you have some object in memory and you need to dynamically make sure that it is compatible with some interface, and to look up which method in the object is really corresponds to which method in the interface, that can take some time. And this is faster in .NET 6. And as I already mentioned, the JSON serialization, the system text JSON, is now can now use source generators. So if you are serializing your still the same objects, you can pre-generate the serialization code during the compile time of your application, which is really nice, because then the serialization won't use any reflection, which is also a little bit slower than normal access to class properties and things like that. So this is also quite significant speed up, and everyone can take advantage of it in .NET 6. In C#10 there is also a lot of new things. My personal favorite is global usings, so you don't need to start every file with 20 using directives, because in every file I'm using system collections generic, in every file I'm using system.link, in every file I'm using system. So these frequent usings which are in every file of your application, these can be just declared on one place, and you will have them everywhere. So this helps to clean up the using section of the file a bit, and also it can help with getting rid of some merge conflicts and things like that, because a lot of people like when the usings are sorted, so somebody sorts the usings and then makes a pull request, and it can create merge conflicts and things like that. So this is very nice, and it helps to keep this section much smaller and much cleaner. Also, there are file scope namespaces in 99% C# files. I guess there is only one namespace, so there is no need to indent all the code by one tab or 4 spaces or something like that. You can just name the namespace at the top of the file without the curly braces. So it will also help in readability a bit, and it cleans up some mess from the C# files. There is also, if you are using lambdas and things like that, you can use attributes on the lambdas and on the parameters, and you can use the new type inference for lambdas, because if you wanted to write var my function equals and then to define some lambda, it wasn't possible in previous versions of C#. Now it is possible with C#10, because you can the compiler can infer the parameters, and also you can manually specify the return type for the lambda. Yeah, so that's also very nice. So this is also my favorite feature. There is a lot of improvements in structs. I think that a lot of people is not using structs very often. Like, you are using the structs which are built in the framework itself, but not many people declare their own structs. But if you do, if you have some performance reasons for using structs, then there is a lot of improvements. You can use parameterless constructors. There are many other tiny things, but if you are writing some performance optimized code, this can be very helpful. And there is also improvements to link, and it's very nice. It's very interesting for me, because the link was introduced in .NET Framework 3.5, and since then not many things in the link itself actually changed, but in .NET 6 there are a lot of new methods. So for example, there is, the name is a little bit long, like try get non-enumerated count, but it's very useful, because if your method accepts IEnumerable and you need to know the number of items, in some cases the underlying type doesn't know how many items is there. So if you call .count with the parentheses, that means that it will go through the entire enumerable and count the items. So you can use this method to make sure if you are able to get the count right away, or if you need to enumerate the collection and count the items. There are other useful methods like distinct by, union by, and min by, max by. So you can basically select the item based on some criteria, for example in min by, so give me the order which has the lowest price or something like that, or distinct the orders by their ID or something like that. There are also new types for just date and just time, which is quite interesting, because also the date time type, which is here from the first version of .NET, it didn't change a lot. It's a good thing actually, because any change in this type would probably affect most of the applications. However, if you wanted to use date time to represent just the date without the time part, it could get complicated, because should it be in UTC or in your local time? Who knows? Yeah. So this can also help if you need to represent just the date without the time zone, or offset, not time zone, without the offset, or the flag if it includes the local time or UTC. This is very, very useful. Also time only struct. It's very nice, and I'm happy to see these fundamental improvements in .NET, because I thought that for last few years only some new frameworks were introduced, no new technologies, but not many changes to base class library. So these are very nice changes which make the runtime even better. Also, the new release of Visual Studio 2022 is very I think it very sounds in the .NET community, because a lot of people have been using VS 2022 in the previews, and now you can upgrade to the production stable version. So I was impressed how fast it is actually when I compare how much time it takes to start VS 2019 and 22, and how much time it takes to load a large project in it. The difference is quite significant, and I'm not talking about that the ReSharper doesn't have the stable version for VS 22 right now, so it's faster because I don't have ReSharper there, that's true. But even without ReSharper, the performance improvement is very, very significant. It's finally 64-bit, so it makes a lot of things easier, at least for the Visual Studio authors, so they don't need to expose some functionality in separate processes to be able to fight with the 32-bit limitations, because I guess that it also adds to the instability of Visual Studio if they have to move larger functions like profiling or debugging out of process. So this also helps, but also it can help extension authors, because sometimes they just need more memory to cache a lot of information to make the extension faster. So this is also very nice. There is also a multi-repository support in one solution, which is also very interesting and also very helpful, because if you don't have one large repo, but you have your project split into several repositories, this is very useful. And what I like, and I really like this feature, is IntelliCode, which is AI-assisted code suggestions. So you can start typing like a method, and it suggests you the entire line of code which you will probably want to write. And this is very nice, because when I was preparing a demo for this session, I wanted to implement a simple method, and basically the IntelliCode did the method for me. It's not it doesn't work to such extent like, for example, GitHub Copilot, which is also very impressive piece of technology, but it is, at least from the few days with Visual Studio 2022, I can say it's very practical, so I really like it. And because I'm from the .vvm team, we are taking care with couple of my colleagues. We are taking care of the .vvm open source project. We are also using Visual Studio 2022, and we also want to support it for the users of .vvm, because .vvm requires an extension for Visual Studio to have IntelliSense and syntax highlighting and all those things. So we already have the extension for VS 2022. You can download it in Visual Studio. Just go to the extension menu and search for .vvm, and you will find it. There is also a link in the video, dotvvm.com/install, where you can get, there is instructions how you can get this new version. We also support VS 2019, so if you don't want to upgrade today, no worries, .vvm will be supported there. We also have extension for VS 2017, but we will be retiring this extension because it's very difficult for us to support all the versions of Visual Studio. So we will be supporting 2022 and 2019. We have added a couple of new features in the extension recently. So if you want to create a project which is using .NET 6 and it's using a preview version of .vvm 4.0, this is now possible. You will see it in a minute. And we have also some new templates for new features in .vvm, like JS modules. So if you want to add JS module into your application, it's very simple. You have a template for it. And we are working on syntax improvements, because we have allowed to use new syntax constructs in your DOT HTML files, but the extension doesn't support them to all extents. So this is what will be coming quite soon, but we are working on this. So let's see how .vvm works in VS 2022. So I have, let me find the correct window. I have this new project dialog. So if you run the Visual Studio, you will see this screen. You can just click on Create New Project. And if you install the .vvm extension and search for .vvm, you will see two project templates. First is for .NET Core, which is the preferred one. Actually, the name should be .NET Core and .NET 5.6, because from 5 and 6 there is no the core. It's not there already, but it's still using the new project system, new format of the CSproj file. So this template is for you. And if you are working with legacy code and you need to integrate into older projects, you can use this Owen on .NET Framework template. But of course, for new projects, I would recommend using this .NET Core version. So if you decide to create a new .vvm application, you can now select which version of .vvm you want to target. So there is 3.2, which is the current stable production ready version. And there is also version 4.0, which is currently in preview. We will be releasing the stable version hopefully by the end of this year. So it's not very far from now. And you can select also the version of .NET. We support on .NET Core. We support .NET Core 3.1, 5, and 6. In .NET Framework, we support everything from .NET 4.5.1 on the version of .vvm 3.2, and from version 4 we will be retiring the old versions of .NET, but if you have .NET 4.7.2 or higher, it will work with .vvm. So that's one of the things that will be changed from .vvm 4.0. So let's create the project, and we will see how it looks. So you have this intro page where you can find information about how .vvm works. And if you look in the Solution Explorer, it created the basic structure of the .vvm project for you. So if you haven't seen .vvm yet, it's basically a framework built of ASP.NET Core. So a lot of things come from ASP.NET Core. So if you want to do authentication and things like that, .vvm doesn't have anything special for it. You are just using the ASP.NET Core tools and infrastructure. But we have our own view engine, which is using the model view model approach. So you have the page with dot HTML syntax, and every page has its view model, which basically represents the state of the page. So you can declare properties to represent the state of the user interface. So I have the title property here. I'm initializing it to hello from .vvm. And here in the page, you can use data binding expressions, which can print out this value. Or also you can use components. So for example, you can use text box, and you can just use this property in the text box. So when you run the application, you will see that the page will contain the text box, and you can edit the value which is in the view model. Yeah, so you can see there is hello from .vvm. If you change it for example, hello.NET Conf, and leave this field, you can see the data binding works in both ways, like in every model view model framework. So if you change the property, it will be written in the view model, and on all places where the same property is being used, the value will be updated. So this title is updated because it's bound to the same property in the view model, like the text box. And you can of course do a lot of things. So I know that if you create a new Blazor application, there is the very simple counter, like you can increment a value. So this is very easy to make in .vvm, because if you create a counter, you can say value is, for example, my counter. You can just create this property in the view model and press F12 and set it as an integer. And then we can create a function called increment. And now this is my favorite thing, because now IntelliCode tells me what I should do. So it recognized that probably I will be working with the my counter, and that probably I will want to increment it, which is very nice. So now I can just press tab and go to launch, and the programming work is done. So it's very nice, and I really love IntelliCode. I was surprised when I was using it in real scenarios, but because quite often it really nicely guessed what I'm trying to do. So it's very impressive. I really like it. And I can add a button, which will call this method. So let's add button, text like increment. Yeah, so that's it. So now I can just rebuild my app and restart it, and it's here. So I can just use this to increment my counter. So in DotVVM you can use components. There is plenty of components which are built in the DotVVM framework, so you can just use them. And you can call methods in the view model, and you can manipulate with the state of the view model using properties. So it's very simple, and you can see the page is updating dynamically. There is no refresh, no reload of the page, and I haven't written a single line of JavaScript, so that's very nice. And I know there is a lot of people who are using Blazor, which also helps you to write web apps without using JavaScript. So DotVVM can do this too. And if you like model view model approach, like from WPF or Silverlight, I know this shouldn't be told anymore, or from your Xamarin Forms apps, for example, if you like the MVVM approach, DotVVM will be very natural to use for you because it's using the same pattern. So let's go back to the slides. One of my most favorite features in .NET 6 and VS 2022 is the hot reload. So you don't need to just recompile your application to see changes in your code. You can just make changes to your code and inject them to the existing running process. So you run the application, change the code, and these changes are just put into the running process. So you don't need to restart it, which means that you will save several seconds of your life, because every process needs some time to initialize everything, to populate caches, to load the configuration. And if it's a real world application which is using, I don't know, dependency injection containers, or if it uses some infrastructure like Entity Framework or Automapper, these technologies, these libraries need to be initialized, and it takes some time. So you can make changes to your code without full restart of the process, which is very nice. And because we really love this feature in the team, we decided to support it in DotVVM too. So if you make changes to DOT HTML markup, you will get a similar experience using hot reload. There are no new NuGet packages like DotVVM hot reload, ASP.NET Core, and we support it on Owen too. So if you still use DotVVM with old .NET Framework project, you can still have this feature for DotVVM in Owen. So let's see the demo. I will use the same application like this. So it's here, and let's do this. I will just put this on one half of the screen, and I will use this on the second half of the screen. So this is my page. I will make sure it's refreshed, and now I can change the markup. So let's, for example, get rid of this binding and say just my awesome app. And you can see the page reloaded. So you could see that it blinked because it reloaded. But .vvm can save the state. So if, for example, if I set the state of the mine counter variable to 9, and then I change something in the page, then you will see the state was persisted. So if you are debugging or just editing some large page where you filled some long form, you can still make changes, and .vvm will keep the state as is, because it just saves the state before the page is reloaded, and after it's reloaded it just restores the previous state of the page. So if you are making changes to the markup, it's very simple. I don't like this text box here, so let's get rid of it. It's fine. I want to allow the users to decrement the values. So that's what you can do. So let's add a second button called decrement. And now I don't need to call methods in the view model because this is very simple thing. I can just say my counter equals my counter -1, and I can just save it, and you have increment and decrement button here, and it works. This is a trick because this allows me to just change the markup. So once I'm doing changes in markup, I can keep the state of the application, and that's fine. If you decide to make change in the view model, for example, like let's say the increment function will be incrementing by 2 and not by 1. So let's do this. I hope that now the IntelliCode gathers what increment methods typically do, so I hope that I won't ruin this experience for other users. If someone else will be writing the increment method, I hope that IntelliCode will still be suggesting that it should increment only by 1. So that's my change. And now there is a new magic button, hot reload, in the toolbar. It's I have to go to it like here because the window is doesn't have enough room. But if you do this, it will just implement, it will just inject the new method body in the existing process. When the backend part of .vvm is changed, then we cannot persist the state right now. We will try to do it, but it doesn't work in all cases. So right now, if you make change in the C# code, this page will reset the state. But since you will be also probably making changes in the view model, that's not maybe such big deal. But if I now click on the increment, it increments by 2, and the change is really immediate. So if I will increment by 3, and I will just do a hot reload and immediately click on the button, you can see that it works immediately. Normally, if I would like to rebuild the application, it would take, now I rebuild the application, and you can see it takes 2 or 3 seconds until everything is initialized. So the hot reload is much faster. So if I change this and apply it to the code and immediately click, you can see it works immediately. Yeah, this is very nice. If you are doing some more sophisticated changes to the page, like adding new methods, which is a hot reload also supports. So please, IntelliCode, tell me how should I do it. Okay, it's not showing right now. Okay, now when I write 2 letters, that's fine. So my counter -, that's very nice. But now, if I just use this thing in the data binding, .vvm will complain about because it cannot detect that new method appeared during the hot reload. So you will get the error screen. Right now, we will try to get over this limitation, but right now in the current version, we cannot fix this. But if you just rebuild the application, the page will automatically reload. So once you are doing changes in your code and they couldn't be applied in the process, you can just run Ctrl+Shift+B or F6 or something like that to rebuild the project, and the page will reload automatically and it will start working again. So now I can decrement. Yeah. So this is the workaround for this situation, because in some cases .vvm cannot just do the hot reload experience. But if you are working in the OT.html file, it will work very, very nice, because you can do any changes to your markup and it will still work. You can delete everything, for example, and now my page is empty. You can put it back and the page is here, including the state. Yeah, so it's very, very nice and very useful. So I hope that the hot reload experience will help you in your everyday job. And so here is what we support right now and what we doesn't support. So if you change only the bodies of methods in the view model, then hot reload is working, because you just change the implementation of the method, but the structure, the interface of the view model didn't change. If you make changes to properties or methods in the view model, like the structural changes, then we will probably support this in the future. It doesn't work with the current version of .vvm 4.0. If you make changes to the startup and .vvm startup, probably we will need to restart the entire process, because it means that the configuration is different, the services are different, and it would be very difficult to support this. And if you make changes in other parts of the code, it depends on the current scenario, and basically it's the .NET runtime feature, not .vvm feature. So from the .vvm perspective, .vvm only cares about the views and view models. All other code is dependent whether the .NET runtime can apply the change or if it needs to restart the application. Yeah? But even if the application needs to be rebuilt and restarted, the page will watch for this event and it will reload automatically, which is also nice, because if you have two displays, you can just have the Visual Studio on one display and the page on the other display, and you will see the changes immediately, which is very nice for development. So .vvm 4.0 preview 3 is now public, so you can use it in your applications. If you install .vvm for Visual Studio 2022, you will be able to create a new project which is using .vvm 4.0. So there is a support for the hot reload you just saw. There is new Roslyn analyzers which will help you to make sure that everything you have in your view models is supported in .vvm, and my colleague will be talking about this feature in a few minutes, so stay tuned. And there is also some nice areas which .vvm 4.0 is introducing. One of them is composite controls, which I will be showing right now. And also we have new scenarios for integration of React or other framework components. Like if you are using, for example, Svelte or Vue.js, there will be a way how to host these controls in .vvm pages, which can be very nice, because .vvm can help you with delivery of data you have on the server in your database, for example, to the browser. Because .vvm takes the view model in the C# on the server and it serializes it and sends it with the page to the browser, so and makes it accessible on the client. So you can then get data from this view model and pass it to a React component. So that means that you can use React components and you don't need to build any kind of API on the server. You just include this data in the view model of your page, and .vvm will make sure this is available on the client. And also the way back, for of course, if you call a method, .vvm will take the view model, send the data to the server, and you can work with that. So it helps you to build interactive client-side applications without using any kind of API. Of course, there is a lot of bug fixes and improvements in .vvm 4.0. We are also dropping support for Internet Explorer, finally, after like 20 years or something, something like that. We are also dropping support for very old versions of .NET Framework, like 4.5.1, 4.5.2, and things like that. The lowest version of .NET Framework will be 4.7.2, which we still believe is possible. Also for the modernization scenarios, like if you have a web forms app, it should be possible to migrate it to .NET 4.7.2 somehow without too many problems. And if you are on this version, then you can use .vvm to modernize this application and go to .NET 6, which is useful for a lot of people. So one of the areas we wanted to address in .vvm 4.0 was that writing .vvm components is pretty hard. We have built a lot of components for our packages of components we have with .vvm, and there is also a lot of components as part of the framework. But if you look at how the components are implemented, it's not very easy. It's a quite long syntax. It's very error prone because the controls are quite low level, and the more universal control you try to build, the more difficult it is actually. If you are just reusing parts of the markup in the application, it's quite simple, but if you want to do some more sophisticated stuff, then it gets complicated. So one of the areas .vvm 4.0 focuses on is to making this easier. Until now, you were able to define two types of controls. The first kind of control was markup control, which is basically a separate markup file, and you can register this piece of markup and then you can use it in any page you want. You can also pass parameters to it, using a code behind class and custom properties, but there is some limitations that are present in markup controls and that wouldn't be very easy to solve. So you can do quite a lot of things with markup controls, but not everything. You cannot write your own repeater using markup controls, for example. It would be very difficult and it doesn't make much sense. The other kind of controls are code-only controls, which are more powerful. They can do everything. Basically, all components which are part of .vvm are done as code-only controls, but it's not very easy to write. If you have been writing controls for ASP.NET Web Forms, it's a similar pain because it is possible, it's kind of powerful, but it's not very easy to learn and it's not very easy to do. So we were thinking about how to make this experience more simple, and we introduced composite controls in .vvm. So let's see how the controls were implemented before .vvm 4.0. So let's end this, and I have another instance of Visual Studio hopefully here. Okay, so if you want to write a markup control, it looks like this. You create a separate markup file with an extension dot control, and you can just place a piece of markup here. You can use binding expressions like normally, and the control can have its code behind class. So this thumbnail placeholder, it's a code behind class, and you can define your own properties. This syntax is quite long. We had a code snippet for it, but still it's like 7-8 lines of code. It's similar like dependency properties in WPF. You don't want to write this, you don't want to maintain this. It's long and it's not very nicely readable. But you can do this. You can use _control.image URL to access these properties. So this control, for example, it gets the image URL and it displays the image. And also you can manipulate with the size. And if the image is not present, it will just render some default placeholder of the specific size you want to use. So it's quite simple control. You can use it on thousands of places in your application, but to write this control, it's not very easy. You need to have two files, which is not such a big problem, but still it's not the perfect thing you might want. So that's how it works. And if you want to write a code-only control, then it looks like this. For example, I want to create a list of thumbnails. So I want to render some title, and then I want to pass a collection of images to the control, and the control should render thumbnails for each of the image. So I will pass a collection of like URLs, and it will render the collection for me. So I am creating a data source property, some binding, because the collection will likely contain some objects. So I want to say, okay, use this property as a title, use this property as a URL of the image. So that's why this binding is for. And then I will be just creating the title like h2 and rendering the title. And then I will be creating a repeater because I don't want to deal with the collections myself. And because I want to use the thumbnail placeholder markup control in this control, I could do this. But because it's markup control, I cannot just say new thumbnail placeholder. I need to use these 3 lines of code to really correctly load this markup control. So it's not very nice. And this is not very well documented also. So it's like you need to go to the source code of the framework and copy paste it. It's not a good experience for developers. So we decided to change it. So that's why we have introduced a concept of so-called composite control. It's a new way how you can create controls, and it will work from .vvm 4.0. And basically, it's useful if your component is composed from already existing components. Because that gives you the most value. So like the thumbnail list, which is basically a title and a repeater, which will render some collection, this is the ideal scenario for this composite control. So basically you need to do 2 things. You can declare a class which derives from composite control, and you will implement the getContents method. and you can declare properties as arguments of this method. So that's what you can do. So let's see how I would rewrite this thumbnail placeholder as a composite control. Basically, I will be rendering the image element, and I need to set this expression to the source. I need to set some style and some alternative text, which is basically a static value right now. I don't have a parameter for this, although I probably should have a parameter for this. So I have this thumbnail placeholder composite, and you can see it's a C# class which inherits from composite control, and there is just one method which says, okay, this control contains this. Yeah. So in this method, you should return a .vvm control, which represents the inner side of the component. Yeah. And you can use parameters to define properties. So this control will have the image URL property, and it can be just a static value or it can be a data binding. So we have a new type called value or binding, because that was one of the complications of .vvm components, that in many properties you could have either a value or a data binding, and in each case you wanted to do something else. Yeah. So now we have a type value or binding, which can just represent both cases. And if it's not set, we will set it to null, because this property is basically optional. And there is the size parameter, and it's just integer, so you can set it from the markup, but it cannot be a data binding. It's not dynamic, it cannot change once the control is rendered. It's just a static value you need to specify in the markup, like this. Yeah, you can see size equals 200, but you cannot see size equals binding, because the control doesn't support it. Okay, so basically inside the control, I will create new HTML generic control. I will set the alt text, which is the most easy. Then I will set the height for like the size I got. It's just an integer, so I will know it. So size plus number of pixels. And then I want to build this expression, and we have this API to build this binding expression. It will probably change, because this is right now, it's my extension method. It's not part of the framework. It will be there in the production version. But basically, I want to use the value, and if it's null or empty, I will use the placeholder URL. Otherwise, I will use the value. So if it's set, I will use the value. Otherwise, I will use the placeholder URL. And because the placeholder URL is not a constant, it's my expression that I'm just building from this, like this thing, then I can just substitute it here into this delegate. So I will just declare additional parameter, which is going in the expression, and I will supply this value for this second parameter. The API will probably change, but this is much easier than it was in previous versions. So we hope that we will have some nice syntax for building custom binding expressions. So this is the thumbnail placeholder control, and if you want to see it in action, then we can go to this simple page. There is the thumbnail placeholder. You can see I can set the image URL just in the markup, or I can use the data binding. So this version, this composite version, it gets the image URL as a data binding. Yeah? And the control needs to support both cases actually. So that's it. So if I run this app, you will see that it will render a picture of me or the placeholder. Okay, sorry. Oh, sorry for that. This happens when you are cloning the repo from Git, and if you have empty folder there, it won't really work. So I love git.txt, and now the www root folder will be created, because if you clone your repository from GitHub and the folder is empty, it will not be created. So thank you, Git, for reminding me that empty folders are not a good idea. So let's wait, and you can see that the first image is some real photo, and the second is generated placeholder for me. And this first line is the original markup control, and this is the composite control. Yeah. And if you want to compose other controls like the list, so that's the repeater and the title, basically it's this one. So this is the list of thumbnails. So also if I implement it like the composite control, you will just inherit from composite control and implement the getContext method. And here it's a little more complicated, but not too much, because I am just allowing a value or binding for the title. If it's not set, I will use the title photo list, so you can provide a default value using this attribute. You can provide a data source, which is enumerable of anything. It can be any collection. And if it's collection of objects, you also need to say item image URL binding. So you need to basically say, okay, in these objects, this property is the URL of the image. Yeah? So it's been used like this. So you can say data source is people. It's a collection of my person objects. And I need to say that item image URL binding is image URL. So this expression is evaluated on the member of this collection. That's why you need these data context change attributes here. It's same like in previous versions, but you can declare it like this. And you will just return two controls. Yeah, the composite control, it doesn't have to return just one component. It can return enumerable of controls. So I will return the title first, and we have a new Fluent API, so it's very easy. So yield return the title with this text, and yield return the repeater with this template. And because I already have the thumbnail placeholder implemented as a composite control, I can just say new composite control. So I can just use new thumbnail placeholder composite and set the properties like this using the set property helper method, which is very powerful. And then I will just set the data source to data source for the repeater, and that's it. Yeah. So it's very easy to compose components from already existing ones. So I'm using HTML generic control, which is part of the framework, and also repeater, which is also in the framework. Yeah, and you can see this code is quite clean. It's not very long, and it's probably much easier to maintain than just this ugly stuff. So I hope that this will help to build more powerful controls more easily. And basically we are using already this feature to implement wrappers for Fluent UI. Fluent UI, I hope that you heard about it. It's a collection of components Microsoft is using in their application. So if you look at the Office 365 or Azure portal, you can see there is all the components have a very similar style, and basically it's the Fluent UI design system. So you probably know these components, and if you want to use them, it's quite easy with the new web components version Microsoft is working on right now. And the controls were originally written in React, but now they are using web components. And it's very nice because it's framework agnostic. You can use these components in any web framework. So even if you are using Angular, even if you are using .vvm, you will be able to use these components. Basically, what web components actually do is that they introduce support for new elements. So in the browser, you can use a new element like Fluent button, and the web components can tell the browser, okay, if you see this element, render something like this. Yeah? So it extends the collection of HTML elements the browser is able to support. And because .vvm can manipulate with the HTML elements in the page, like you can use the text and set the text inside the element, or you can handle events like events.click equals something, then you are very close to being able to use these Fluent UI components. There is a problem with data binding because the data binding in .vvm is two-way. So if you want to bind in the web components in two-way, you need your own implementation of the binding, but we have created this fast bind wrapper which can do this. And to make the syntax nicer, we just want to create a wrappers so the Fluent UI components will be used similarly to native components. So let's see, I have a demo for it right here. So this is the project we are working on right now. It implements a lot of components which are part of the Fluent UI. So there is, for example, the select or drop-down list, data grid, dialogues, all form controls, progress bar, radio button groups, tree view, a lot of components that are part of the Fluent UI. And we are building the wrappers over these components. For example, let's see the button. So basically, we are writing this Fluent button, which will have the click properties, text properties, everything you would expect, enabled autofocus, anything you would expect on normal .vvm component. We will have a version for the Fluent UI, and they are implemented as a composite control. So if you look at the button implementation, you can see it's a composite control. We just created the Fluent UI composite control, which adds the JavaScript resources to the page, so the components can work. But basically, we are just rendering Fluent button element, and we are setting attributes to these properties. So it's very easy to write wrappers over existing sets of components, because you just define the class, you define the getContents method, and here you can just list all the properties you want, and you tell .vvm how should the output HTML look like. So it will render the Fluent button element, and that set all the attributes to there. So let's see how it works. If you look at the button page, you can see the styles of the controls. They really look like the Microsoft, like in Microsoft applications. Of course, this is customizable, so you can change the colors of and accents on all parameters of this design system. And what I really like is that if you change the background color, it will switch to the dark mode. So if you change the background color on some page level element, like there is some Fluent UI design system, if you change the background color there, all colors of everything will recalculate and it will support the dark mode. It's really impressive. Just by changing one property, you will change the theme of the entire application. So this is very nice. And if you look how this looks in the DOM Explorer, you will see that really in the page there are the Fluent -button elements. This is what the web components does. They just extend the set of HTML elements to which the browser understands. So if the browser sees Fluent button in the page, it will run some piece of JavaScript that will provide the virtual DOM inside, or the shadow DOM inside the element. So basically what you can see here in the shadow root is that on the background there is a button. It will have some styles applied, and there is some JavaScript behavior on top of it. But it will still behave like a button, because if I press tab, for example, yeah, it can get focus because it's still the button, but it can have custom look, and you can use it in HTML like this, just Fluent button. So any framework for web can render this HTML, and that's also good for .vvm, because .vvm can do it too. And because .vvm offers IntelliSense for our components, because it knows the types of these things, then it's very easy to make wrappers over the Fluent UI components. This project is not public yet. We hope that we will be able to finish it soon, and once it's finished, we will publish it, because it will also allow you to use Fluent UI in your applications, and the syntax for it will be very natural. So if you want to use, for example, the combo box, or they name it select, so that's the select control, and you will be able to use it like the normal combo box, which is in .vvm framework. So you can set the data source to some collection, you will have the selected value, and you can say that, okay, the selected value will be ID of the selected object, and display text will be the name of the selected object. Yeah, so that's very nice, very natural. And also, if you will be using normal combo box in your application, the properties are almost the same except for the appearance, which is specific to Fluent UI. But if you are using normal combo boxes in your application, it will be probably very easy to just change combo box to Fluent Select, and you will get the nice design of the controls basically for free. So this is what I really like, and we are of course making progress in having this API the most similar to the framework components, so the change will be easy for everyone if you want to use these controls. Okay, so this is for the first part of this event. After a short break, my colleague Andrei will show you the Roslyn analyzers and how we are using them in DotVVM to help you build view models in a more nicer way. So if you have never tried DotVVM, go to dotvvm.com/install and download the extension for Visual Studio and try to create your project now. And of course, we will be very happy to talk with you. So if you have any questions about DotVVM, any suggestions or feedback, just let us know. We will be very happy to talk to you on our GitHub or Gitter chat or on any other place. And follow us on Twitter. So see you in 10 minutes after a short break.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the second part of this DotVVM presentation. My name is Andrei and I'll be speaking to you today about a new upcoming feature for DotVVM 4.0, which I find to be personally pretty interesting, and it will be about Roslyn analyzers. So for the upcoming version of DotVVM 4.0, we have been working with Roslyn analyzer technology, and we're trying to figure out the best way to integrate it into our code base and how we can leverage its great capabilities in order to implement our own custom analyzers and code fixes. So for those of you that do not know Roslyn analyzers, or are wondering actually what are Roslyn analyzers, so commonly you can meet them in your favorite integrated development environment, and you can interact with them with this light bulb icon. So most commonly this can show you that you have an error, or it can flag some warning or even a potential error, and it can provide you with a opportunity to apply a custom code fix. So for example, in this image we can see that user wrote an incorrect identifier CLSS, which of course the user probably meant to write class. So the code fix that is provided is to, of course, help user to write the correct identifier. But of course, this is a pretty trivial example, but just so that we are all on the same page, this is something that is that's been going on quite some time. Many projects have been using this technology, and right now we would like to integrate it as well. So more formally, Roslyn Analyzers is a static code analysis framework for C# and Visual Basic .NET. It's built on top of Roslyn infrastructure, and as I mentioned already, it has great integration with modern integrated development environments. So whether you use Visual Studio Code, Rider, or really any other supported modern IDEs, you can take advantage of Roslyn analyzers. So common use cases that are there for Roslyn analyzers is to help with maintaining code conventions, of course, code quality, various checks and fixes. But in my opinion, a very important aspect for that Roslyn analyzers can help us with is to identify potential bugs, and if possible, maybe provide a way, an easy to use way for programmer to fix those issues. So yeah, this is basically what Roslyn analyzers are all about. And right now I would like to go over the goals that we have as a DotVVM team for the DotVVM code base and also its users. So Roslyn analyzers for DotVVM, of course, we are there will be there to help you and maintain the code quality of your projects, or even improve it. So we would like to detect common issues. So over the years, DotVVM has been available for its users. The DotVVM team has identified numerous common pitfalls or some aspects that, let's say, new users have problems with, and we would like to help users identify these issues as soon as they write the code, basically, so that there are no weird runtime errors for them to discover. But we would be really liked to provide them with a way so that they can discover these issues as early as when they are typing the code. And Of course, one of the very important use case for us is to guide users with updating to newer versions of framework. So with every major release for big projects like .vvm, it's sometimes common to provide new API, obsolete, some older, not really efficient, or I would say suggested to use methods. So maybe this is also a really nice opportunity for us to write some code fixes to help users to maybe change from obsolete methods, or even help with some breaking changes whenever upgrading to newer version of the framework. So yeah, as I've been saying, providing code fixes for some known issues, but I think another important point is to help users, especially new users, to adopt .vvm, because I'm quite sure that we can all remember, like, starting with a new technology, downloading the framework or running the hello world, playing around with it a little, and seeing what it does. So in my opinion, it's not a great idea to expect users to read the documentation thoroughly before attempting or trying something out with the framework. And basically, we would like to use Roslyn analyzers to help these users and flag common pitfalls or issues basically as soon as possible. So yeah, there are many advantages for us basically to use Roslyn analyzers, and that's why we basically decided to do it. So right now, basically we implemented a few analyzers, mostly in regards to viewModel serializability analysis. So rules such as not to use unserializable properties. But yeah, let me first mention why this is important. Of course, users of .vvm know that viewModels in .vvm need to be actually JSON serializable. So we store the state in viewModels for our pages, and these viewModels need to be serializable to JSON. So yeah, there are actually some users may have various issues or may encounter problems like putting something that is not really serializable or supported by .vvm into viewModels. And yeah, this is basically a really nice use case for Roslyn analyzers to flag these issues. So far we implemented rules such as do not use unserializable properties. Well, this is so far, I think, really like self-explanatory. Do not use unsupported types in viewModels, because from .NET you may know that there are actually many types that are serializable into JSON. However, some of these types that are serializable by .NET are basically not yet supported by .vvm, and that's basically because we need to be able to interpret these values also in JavaScript. So some of the types that you may use may not be supported yet by .vvm. So we would like to flag these too. And yeah, another rule maybe do not use fields to represent viewModels state. So in .vvm we basically use properties to store basically the state and not fields. And we would also like to discourage users from writing properties with interfaces or abstract classes, as these can be error prone because the exact type may not be known, and it may cause some issues either during serialization or deserialization. And these rules, as I've showed you just now, may look quite simple, but actually the implementation is, of course, a bit more complicated. So, for example, there are many conditions, such as using the commonly known bind attribute, which you may specify on a property, for example, that you don't want to basically transfer this property from client to server and also from server to client. So it does not really participate in the serialization. So it doesn't need to be flagged even if it's not serializable or supported. So yeah, we try to implement these rules as good as possible so that basically, yeah, just to flag only the issues. So you can feel free to use them once .vvm 4.0 is out. They may help you and discover some potential problems in your code base. And of course, there are many more Roslyn analyzers and also code fixes to come. So right now we are investigating options how to implement some other analyzers. So for example, we would like to analyze usage of attributes. So in .vvm, for example, we use many attributes which have common name with other frameworks, such as authorize attribute or from root, from query, and so on. So we would like to write analyzers that if user is actually writing right now a view model for .vvm, we are quite certain that they want to use the attributes from .vvm namespace, basically. Also, another opportunity, for example, with static commands, we would like to encourage users to use static command services and basically also encourage the users to write our allow static command attribute only on static methods, because on other methods it may cause it may be error prone to users. So yeah, it's probably best way only to use static commands, and we would really like to encourage users using Roslyn analyzers to do so. And also, as I've been saying earlier, various code fixes for upgrading. So for example, in .vvm 4.0 there will be some changes in authorization, so we will be basically encouraging users to use our new API, and this is also something that we can basically try and provide with code fixes. So yeah, this is what we currently have, and roughly the plan for more analyzers that will be coming hopefully shortly as well. And yeah, how you can use Roslyn analyzers for .vvm, where basically the only thing that you need to do is just to upgrade to .vvm 4.0. So the Roslyn analyzers are basically packaged together with the framework in a NuGet package that you can just reference in your application. And these basically these analyzers will be registered for you automatically. You may use, of course, the Visual Studio extension, which will help you to create a new project, and you can specify there the .vvm 4.0, and once you create a new project, these analyzers will be automatically registered for you as well. And yeah, Roslyn analyzers, of course, work on both ASP.NET Core projects and also older OWIN projects. So yeah, this is for how to use Roslyn analyzers, or better said, how to get them. And right now, I'd like to show you a quick demonstration of this new feature. And for this, I prepared a pretty trivial example. So as you can see, I have here a really simple .vvm application that is basically just the default page. And on the default view model, I've added some properties. So let's see what it does, I mean. So the first property is of type string. So yeah, I think we can all agree that this is perfectly serializable and you should use such properties in your view model. But then just to showcase the capabilities of Roslyn analyzers, I tried to write something that is not really supported. So for example, pretty much almost everything from the namespace system.io won't be serializable. So yeah, as you can see, it's basically flagged by our Roslyn analyzers, and you can see this error also down here in the error list of Visual Studio. So yeah, what's next? So let's say the user by mistake wanted to write a property, but instead wrote a field using which they wanted to store some state. So in this case, they wrote int a field, which is basically a field, and this is not, of course, supported in view models for storing state. So you should instead use, of course, properties. And down here we can see another potential issue. So user declared property as an interface. So we don't know for sure what concrete implementation will be provided there. And yeah, basically just to be on the safe side, we issue a warning so that user is aware of this issue and can maybe fix it by providing a concrete implementation, let's say. But as you can see, here we have, for example, a interface as a field type, and it's not flagged. And that's a short example of how this behavior can be overridden. So if you provide this bind attribute with direction none, we basically know that this won't be serialized, so that it can be skipped for this analysis. So yeah, as you can see, this is basically pretty interesting and can potentially flag many issues in your code base, or basically just help new users of DotVVM to adopt this technology more faster, because they will get an immediate feedback if they are doing something wrong. And yeah, and it's really nice, has a great integration, and it will be registered automatically for all users of DotVVM 4.0. Of course, there will be a way to opt out. So you can see these analyzers are registered here as standard analyzers. So if you feel like some of them should be turned off, or basically only on some specific lines in your source code, you can, of course, do that. So yeah, this was a real quick example of Roslyn analyzers. And yeah, basically what I would like to say right now, don't forget to upgrade. There are many interesting features coming along in DotVVM 4.0, not only Roslyn analyzers, but today we have already seen many interesting stuff around controls in DotVVM 4.0. So yeah, check it out once it comes out. And if you have, of course, any ideas on how to improve the framework in any way, be it Roslyn analyzers or yeah, literally anything else regarding DotVVM, feel free to write us an issue or let us somehow else know. So at this point, I would like to thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you found this presentation really interesting. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. And once again, I would like to thank you very much and see you later. Bye.